Welcome back. As we jump back in, I'm forced to face the fact that the true enemy of this run is not any of the many various and sundry individuals who would like to see my colony fail. It is instead the cruel and entirely indifferent face of the free market economy. We expanded so fast that we ended up in this weird situation where we're able to craft late-game equipment, but are still so dirt poor that we can't buy any of the things we need to make it, and without more pawns, there isn't a whole lot I can do about that. Well, nothing ethical, at least, but that hasn't stopped me yet, so maybe I should be less concerned. Point remains, I'm going to be on the lookout for more recruits and more opportunities for novel cash flow here for a bit. Specifically, opportunities for novel cash flow that don't involve me wandering across the wasteland, Fallen Empire. Nice try. If you want me to do your dirty work, I expect fair compensation and a free ride. I won't be hearing any of this willing to relocate nonsense. You don't pay well enough. As kind of a stopgap measure for the whole my economy is in the pit situation, I start going around delivering involuntary lead immunizations to all the local wildlife I can get my hands on. Usually when you're hunting in Rimworld, you're doing it to feed your colony, but it's easy to forget that a well-butchered deer can be worth a couple hundred silver, easily, if you sell all the bits to a bulk goods trader. Multiply that by, say, 20, and all of a sudden you have a reasonably excessive amount of cash on the hoof just wandering around eating grass when it could instead be raw materials sitting in your stockpiles. I can also switch over to growing psychite now my first round of medicine is done. The monetary yield of the stuff won't be fantastic with such a small growing area, but every little bit helps, and I do want to have some yayo on hand anyway for various reasons unrelated to its financial value. And also, wow, this map just will not stop spawning animals. It's insane. I know I commented on it in the first episode, but you have to understand, this is like reactor levels of animal meat. What is wrong with this biome? The quest selection is definitely not doing anything to reduce the meat input either. Well, well, well. Look at what we have here. Manhunting megasloths, you say, with a bunch of people to help, fight them. Why yes, come right on in. The quest report, a Psylake neuroformer along with some other junk, is a consumable item that installs or upgrades a pawn's psychic implant, and unless you have a ton of them, they aren't really all that useful. They can be nice to help speed up Psyfocus upgrades if you're relying on animatries to get them, which I'm not, but royal pawns will automatically get theirs upgraded as they progress through the ranks of nobility, and upgrading early just means you don't get the free one from the royals the next time you have a promotion, so the real reward here is going to be all the pelts and meat that I can get from the sloths. Quite by accident, the arrival of my sloths and the subsequent slaughter of my so-called help coincides perfectly with the arrival of a really unlucky raid by the local native population. I'm currently walled in, leaving the raiders no hostile targets on the map to go after. Except for the sloths, of course. The sloths, likewise, who have suffered at best cosmetic losses from my opportunistic hit and run earlier, have no hostile targets. Except for the raiders. This inevitable conflict comes to a head in the middle of my farm box, and after the raiders squeak out a victory, I can mop the remainder up without any issues. Have I mentioned how much I love man-hunting animal quests? We're a real animal enjoyer here at Gooseco. All the money I collected from these various profit-making ventures is then put to use buying one extremely expensive piece of equipment for our good friend Brendan, who by now has accosted so many random bits of wildlife that he's an employable professional looking to invest in a promising career of animal abuse. This is a monosword, also known as the Slayer of Centipedes, Nightmare of Raiders, and aspiration of every kitchen knife commercial ever made. While not as directly damaging as a regular melee weapon, this sword has an insanely high armor penetration value, and it will happily carve through just about everything in the game, up to and including literal tanks. Of course, if you aren't careful, it will also carve through your own colonists, which is why I make sure that the people who use them are specifically selected for their mental stability, in addition to combat prowess. Still, I hate centipedes, so I consider the risk of extinction event level friendly fire to be a small price to pay for being able to peel the things open like sardine cans. I also take another interesting quest that gives me free stuff for the low price of having yet another climate adjuster spawn in nearby. For those who are keeping track, this is the third of the series, and yes, every single one of them is still active. We are recreating the first run, one neglected quest at a time. Adding this third climate adjuster rewards Brendan with another royalty promotion and kicks him up to a level 4 Psylink. Beyond the psychic abilities that grants, being recognized as this level of royalty comes with some other useful perks in the form of permits and a special ability called a throne speech. The throne speech is just a temporary mood buff as long as your pawn has a high social stat, which is nice but is also not world-changing. No, that privilege goes to the permits. Permits are consumable skills that let their owners call in various types of aid from the Fallen Empire on a long cooldown. Most of them are focused around giving you things in case of emergency, and as such sit comfortably between stick-on nails and hair ribbons on the list of things that are useless for a late-game Rimworld colony, but one permit in particular, the Orbital Strike, is absurdly overpowered, especially once you spend a second permit point to upgrade it to an Orbital Salvo. With a 60-day cooldown, this is very much an emergency button kind of ability, but you can also use it while it's still on cooldown by paying 8 honor points, prorated by how long the skill has been cooling down for. This is a very unwise mechanic. Like buffing the meat output of animals, this is one of those cases where Ludion had a fantastic idea but neglected to consider the obvious implications of implementing it, and it turns out the logical conclusions for this permit is a very not good thing for game balance. More on that in the next few episodes. All of this talk of Brendan does, however, remind me that it's time to get my anti-pawn farm box design up and running. Infinite free wildlife is fun and all, but nothing really quite says I beat this game with a stick to cover up my crippling insecurities, quite like automating the collection, euthanasia, and storage of said infinite free wildlife, and the less said about the effects it'll have on the raiders, the better. Normally, I don't like repeating tech, but in this specific case, I will make an exception because for reasons that will become astoundingly clear down the line, my demand for captured pawns got off the couch and jumped through enough buildings to make Superman look like a chump. Incidentally, that difference in mining speed between Paxer Prime and Frostballs there is almost entirely due to the Slothful trait. There is a very good reason that Slothful pawns are an instant refusal for me, and this is it right here. They suck at any task with a substantial work speed component, and it shows very clearly. Also, incidentally, here's Exhibit A as to why I want an auto-kill freezer box. The map is so cold all of the time now that all I need to do to collect literal thousands of silver worth of animal products is open the door and have a couple of guards set to drafted hunt and sit in the hallway for a few hours. Automate that and my cash problems are solved. It also, incidentally, kind of solved my colony's food problems. We don't let the dogs out anymore. We let them in. And then we turn them into sashimi. Have I mentioned how much I love this game? As if getting one of those off the ground wasn't a big enough project already, the Fallen Empire has reached out to me requesting that I build a giant monument to honor the recreational preferences of someone's father. The reward for this, 11 honor, is quite generous, so I will obviously be accepting, though with a mission description like that, I probably would have done it for free. I'm not sure exactly what Athenius Epokos' father was into, but given that he was a dad with a royal title, it's going to be one of two options, and the chance to build a giant monument honoring either kind of his tackle is too hilarious for me to pass up on. Randy, seeing my interest in this project, helpfully provides a defoliator ship to help, clear the jungle out, as it were. Joke's on you, Randy. It's negative 59 degrees centigrade outside. There ain't nothing to defoliate in the first place, except possibly my yayo farm, which for some reason has a ship chunk in it that I just noticed. Wonder when that dropped in. As it so happens, that third climate adjuster proves to be the straw that broke the camel's back, or in my case, the machine that broke my infinite conveyor line of free beefsteak. A bit of time has passed since the last clip, so let me give you an update. We currently have no less than 6 active hostile environment-affecting devices influencing my colony. The first 3 are the climate adjusters, which I've already mentioned, and the 4th, 5th, and 6th are a toxic spewer, a smoke spewer, and the defoliator ship chunk, respectively. All of these are part of mech pods that I haven't bothered taking out yet. Individually, they're also all fairly harmless, and their effects tend to conflict, because after all, why should I care about toxic smog or a defoliator if the area is already too cold to grow things in? but they are starting to combine and cause other issues. For one, having hostile mechs on the map means I can't promote Brendan. The quest just straight up refuses to let me accept it if the map has members of an enemy faction on it. If it were warmer, ground-based traders would also be completely toast, but it's, not warmer, so we don't have to worry about that. Which is good, because the mechs cover a good half of the map now. The biggest issue, however, is that the 3 climate adjusters, smoke spewer, and winter weather have finally dropped my map temperature below the point where most animals can spawn, and I have kind of had my food source cut off at the knees as a result. Even if that map temperature were to recover, though, the toxic spewer would contaminate most of their meat before they got to me, which is forcing me to micromanage hunting missions or eat major losses to my food supply. This isn't a red alert emergency. I do have quite a lot of food saved up, and I can and have converted my farming plot, which is still unaffected by all of this, into producing rice. And worse comes to worse, I can switch to nutrient paste if things get dire, but it is well past the time that I start clearing the place out, and I think I have just the thing. And that thing is this lovely little sapper raid that decided to run itself headlong into 2 of the mech emplacements. Once the raiders are done running themselves headlong into a fortified mech emplacement for me, all I have to do is then clean up their mess. The pirates were polite enough to leave the mech structures intact during most of their fight, but the smoke emitter base sustained enough damage that it detethered the few remaining defenders and forced me to play cleanup there. Not, mind you, that I'm complaining. Because of the way it's positioned, the smoke base was target number 1 anyway, and their Zerg rush saved me quite a lot of effort. With the mechs wiped out, now we just have to deconstruct the rest of the base. And this is where Brendan comes in. Brendan, on his most recent promotion, learned something called Skip. Skip is effectively a moderate-range, single-target teleportation psycast that allows the user to move themselves, items, or other pawns in their line of sight to any other tile in their line of sight with certain range restrictions. It is, by far, the most versatile psycast in the entire arsenal, and if it weren't for psychic invisibility, would probably be the most overpowered, just because of how effective it is for battlefield control. Believe it or not, this is actually its nerfed version, too. It used to not have a weight limit and would let you freely yank centipedes out of position, and yes, that was exactly as busted as it sounds. Most importantly for me, though, it also works with a shield belt equipped, making Brendan uniquely suited, pun intended, for sapping missions where mobility is a concern, like, say, when you need to walk into a fortified position and snipe high-value targets under fire. In this specific case, I could have just as easily used the smoke launcher to prevent turret lock-on and shot them apart, but that would have taken forever, and I wanted to show off. The rest of the emplacements, well, that's a bit of a different story. These pods weren't hit as hard as the smoke spewer pod by the Raider Ball, and while I could pretty easily bait and snipe out the mechs given enough time, I would really rather not expose people to toxic fallout if at all possible. The stuff is nasty. It makes people sick, it gives them mood debuffs, and all of my pawns are valuable enough that I would really like to avoid the risk of brain damage if at all possible. That's where Save Our Ship 2 comes in. Save Our Ship, as part of its space navigation mechanics, introduces several miniature shuttles that can be used for inter-atmosphere and intra-ship transport. They used to be basically the same thing as the royalty shuttles, but with an option to enable something called hover mode, which let you load them up like pack animals and make them members of caravans. Recently, they were completely reworked, and now they have an upgrade buffet that lets you do things like turn them into interceptor aircraft or mobile gunnery platforms, and I have been desperately wanting to find a good use for them. Believe it or not, this was actually pretty hard to do. First off, the ships are fat. The smallest size they come in is a 3x3, and I'm working with a 5x5 footprint on the one I made, so if you don't have a 5-block wide gap, it isn't getting through, and you have to either fly over it or go around whatever is blocking you. Second, they are majorly expensive, even before taking into account all the upgrades you need to make them usable in combat. Seriously, getting Big Chungus here equipped and upgraded probably cost more resources than building an entire vanilla spaceship did. Third, despite this cost, they are surprisingly fragile, and any sort of concentrated fire or rocket impact will make them have a very bad day very quickly. This can be mitigated somewhat by installing shields on them, but the best shield combo I can put on one right now will only be able to take 5 or 6 sniper shots before it overheats. It regenerates at the speed of slug, and the shields themselves, like the ship they are installed on, are fat and expensive, so it's very easy to burn those shields down by aiming in their general direction. The weapons you can equip on them are decent, but not overpowered. They're quite accurate, you can move and shoot simultaneously, and depending on the type of turret you install, they don't really consume ammo, but their fire rate is quite slow, and the damage of each individual projectile often won't kill an armored target. The biggest issue with them, however, is that they're vehicles. So, big moving hunks of metal that can run people over. Because yes, this mod adds vehicular manslaughter. Unfortunately, said manslaughter also does a massive amount of damage to the vehicle, to the point that 1 or 2 impacts is enough to cripple it. So I can't go bowling for bad guys, and I also can't really just hover a bunch of them around battlefields willy-nilly without potentially crushing my own ships or running into my own pawns. In short, despite sounding incredibly overpowered, these things are shockingly well balanced to the standards of base game Rimworld, which was not what I was expecting when I saw that I could have ship-mounted plasma batteries. So, if they're so well balanced, why am I bringing them up at all? Because there's one thing they can do very, very well, and that is extreme range bombardment. As far as I can tell, these shipboard turrets straight up don't have a maximum range, and this enables me to plink down the mechs and their emplacements from well outside any point of danger. Vehicles aren't vulnerable to toxic fallout, and while this would never work against human infantry, because, they would attack me, mechs are leashed to their pods unless their structures take too much damage, so as long as I am careful to manually fire at them, I can sit here and plink away at them all day, and there isn't anything they'll do about it. Unless they have a shield emitter of their own that blocks my shots, or infantry mechs that can chase me off, or my pilot needs to swap out to take a leak. Like I said, checks and balances. That said, after playing around with them for a while, and after Randy helpfully delivered me yet another mech pod with a sun blocker as an experiment, I have revised my opinion back to, wow, these things are overpowered, at least in regard to mech outposts. The damage output and rate of fire on the ships is better than I initially thought, and while shooting the weapons does consume fuel from the ship, you can just carry more and refuel in flight, so that doesn't make much of a difference. The real moneymaker is the combination of infinite range and hypermobility. I'm doing the work of half a dozen or more go-juiced sniper pawns right now, except that I'm one regular pawn in a spaceship and have a lot more effective HP. Plus, if the going gets tough and I need to retreat faster than my hover mode engine can handle, well, I am a space-capable interceptor and all, so I can just take off and land somewhere else and start harassing the pod again. Now, normally I'd be fine with this, since being able to handle raids easily would make getting to space faster and less annoying, but I also don't want to overshadow all of the cool stuff you can do with royalty, so I think moving forwards I'm going to try and minimize how much I use these things for combat. I'm not going to avoid using them entirely, because they do offer useful mundane utility, and I'm certainly going to be using them for transport and logistics, but royalty does a lot of fun things with the combat system, and it would be a shame to ignore all that in favor of Go-Go Gadget Plasma Cannon. What I will do, however, is use them to go take out some of the climate adjusters on the map. Having them around has been fun for a certain technical definition of the word, but I'm tired of looking at the snow and want a bit of a change of pace. And to be able to grow plants without having to make indoor grow zones. That would be pretty convenient, actually. There's nothing special to say here. This sort of hit and run against a fortified target is exactly what these ships are supposed to be used for in space combat, so I'm just gonna let the clip play. All of this work, of course, was so that I could accept this quest, which would have given me a 4th climate adjuster, which I think we can all agree is ridiculous. There's a reason thou shalt count to 3. 4 is absolutely unacceptable. I've said it before, and I will say it again, I absolutely love taking apart mech bases. Something about it just scratches that XCOM strategy itch in my brain. But anyway, the reason I accepted this quest, beyond the honor it'll give Brendan for completing it and the raw materials I can extract from it, is that this particular pod spawns in with 5 unstable power cells. If I successfully extract all 5 of these cells, that's 2,000 watts of free power. Forever. Which is like 55% of a geothermal generator, but with none of the requirements needed to build, maintain, and defend one. I've also been given 6 expendable troopers to help take the place apart, and somewhat unusually for me, I actually want to keep these folks alive for a little bit, just to help with the counter push that's going to happen when I activate the pod. This is where that yayo comes in, by the way. Developing dependencies from just one dose is possible, albeit unlikely, but for loner colonists it doesn't really matter, because I'm not going to be keeping them around, or alive, anyway. The battle begins on the east side of the fort. The mechs built up a wall on that side, and that was actually to their detriment, because it sectioned off most of their static defenses and will slow their response. If I can take them out before reinforcements arrive, that is essentially 3 free centipede kills at very low risk to my units. I open up with a 3-pronged attack, a smoke charge launched at the turret that can see the centipedes, an EMP at the 2 centipedes in the middle, and then have Brendan skip in to distract the 3rd centipede in melee combat until we can EMP it. Everyone else is in charge of burning down everything that can fight back using their weapons. This goes about as smoothly as can be expected, and we clean up with minimal injuries. That was Phase 1. Now for Phase 2. We haven't damaged the climate adjuster by 50% or more of its maximum HP, and in fact haven't touched it at all, so all of the mechs are still tethered to it. They're still hostile, of course, and they will shoot at us if we're in range, but that tether will let us poke their units and retreat in a loop, and they aren't smart enough to commit to rushing us down. To exploit this, I let my colonists heal up a bit before swapping out 4 of my best shooters to sniper rifles, and sending them and my expendable units in to repeatedly pull mechs out of their walls. The snipers are in charge of establishing initial aggro and doing the bulk of the damage, and the expendables are there as attention sinks whose only real job is to tank bullets while snorting medically unadvisable amounts of yayo. At this point, they have mostly outlived their usefulness as anything other than distractions, so their survival is wholly optional. The name of the game here is Slow and Steady, because nothing in this base is a major threat to me, and the only thing that can engage at all is the pikemen. So if I'm careful, this should be an easy takedown. Once I'm done with most of the squishy mechs, I can move on to stage 2.5, which is the slow, boring, and very uninteresting whittling down of centipede blobs. Back when you could skip these things around, this was a whole lot easier because you could go in, pull one out, and burn it down from around a corner with massed fire, but without that tech, your other option is to walk into their tether's aggro range, to make them walk towards you, blast them, and jump back out again when they start getting close. If you do this right, you are 100% safe, but it comes with the drawback of being quite slow, which is a price that I'm willing to pay here, but is not always something that is particularly advisable. The mech hive is largely defanged at this point though, so time is a resource I have in abundance. Inevitably, these centipedes are chipped away into nothing, which is where Brendan and Seiya come in for Phase 3. As touched on earlier, Brendan's skip ability can freely teleport people into weird angles they otherwise wouldn't be able to safely reach, and he has a shield belt that lets him tank a little bit if necessary. Seiya has a smoke launcher that makes it impossible for turrets to lock onto anything, and between the 2 of them, they can safely detonate turrets that are far enough away to not chain react with anything that I want to keep intact. Seiya can also lock down turrets that need to be walled up before they're detonated. Once all the turrets are gone, all that's left is to break the climate adjuster and claim the pods. Easy peasy. You know, if you ignore the fact that it took the better part of an entire season to pull off. So here's a fun game mechanic challenge. I got a quest here where this dude called Bicep basically said, I'm joining, and oh by the way, I have a condition called paralytic abasia that prevents me from moving for a month. First off, I hate the wording on this quest. It's not even that I hate the quest mechanically, because you can just kill the recruitee without consequences before the quest time's out, so if you do it right, there's no penalty for getting rid of them. Literally my only issue with the quest is the wording. The presumption of it irritates me, and it shatters the illusion of control over my colony because now all of a sudden random people are showing up and expecting me to feed them. Anyway, this has been your goose soapbox moment of the day. Putting all that aside, I do actually want to recruit this guy, but if I do, he'll die. This is because he isn't wearing a parka and will freeze to death in my hospital, and I can't force him into a parka because he's paralyzed. I also can't rescue him somewhere else because he's an enemy, so it's jail or nothing. The only solution then is to carve out a quick hotbox in the unroofed area in the center of my base, act like I'm going to capture him, but drop him right before he goes into a sleeping spot, forbid everyone from using the door, accept his recruitment request so I don't have to recruit him like a prisoner, switch the sleeping spot to a regular one, force my pawn to rescue him into that spot instead of the hospital, and then let everyone leave. Please, Ludian, you let me remove clothing items from down pawns. Why won't you let me put them back on? This is literally life-saving technology you're holding out on here. Speaking of which, raiders! Oh no, not raiders. Whatever shall we do? So yeah, the icebox works really darn well. Unfortunately, every single one of the pawns that was downed was either unrecruitable or not someone I would want to recruit, even temporarily, so I opted to let them all freeze. Better luck next time, folks. Bulk prisoner collection is going to start being super valuable here in a bit, but I'm not ready to handle them just yet, so they will make excellent kindling for the incinerators. And, you know, at least my pawns will have something to do now. We were kind of getting bored over here. But hey, you know what? Maybe we should test the icebox again. For old time's sake. You know what I really feel like will give it a good spin? 88 man-hunting cougars. I've had a hankering for cat meat. What about you, Brendan? Well, man, a few words I see. That's fine. You didn't really have a choice. It also works on cougars quite well. So, gentlemen, take note. When in doubt, just stick them in a cryogenic freezer. It does wonders to keep them off your back. All of this work was to clean the map out for Brendan's coronation ceremony, and it pays off in a huge way when he gets Word of Inspiration from his level 5 Psylink upgrade. This is a psychic support skill that gives the person it's used on an inspiration like they would have gotten for being unusually happy, but in exchange for happiness, Brendan just has to spend a day meditating, which I consider to be an excellent trade. Anecdotal evidence seems to suggest that the kind of inspiration you get is influenced by the skills and passions of the pawn you're inspiring, because I can't recall ever getting, say, an animal taming inspiration on someone without any ability to train animals. Regardless of how it works, inspirations are all objectively good. Obviously, I want creative inspirations to roll for legendary weapons and armor, but just about any inspiration has some tangible positive benefit to the colony. You can't inspire yourself, unfortunately, and my next best crafter, Cocoa Pop Eater, is already inspired and you can't stack them, so this one goes to Ferret. I was hoping I could crank out an amazing bed or something, but he is also one of the colony doctors, so he instead got a surgery inspiration, which is fine. There is always going to be some surgical operation I've been putting off to burn this effect on, and once it's consumed, Brendan can immediately re-inspire him once his psi focus returns. Someone in that same vein, completing another mystery structure honoring I don't even know what, honestly, I stopped bothering to read the quest descriptions 2 years ago, gives Brendan enough honor to upgrade to Archon, the final achievable tier of the Fallen Empire nobility. Canonically, this title is considered the highest of the middle nobility, and it's considered normal for them to rule a city or a colony and to possess a starfleet of some sort, which seems fitting. My throne room isn't impressive enough for the ceremony, but once I fix that, Brendan's going to get his last permit point, his final Psylink upgrade, and most relevant to my interests, honor will stop mattering entirely for anything other than permits. Which means I can spend all of it on orbital strikes. And I do, in fact, plan on spending all of it on orbital strikes. I feel exceedingly bad for anything that decides to spawn in without having anything worth looting on them in the near future. Oh look, it's the future. Knock knock. Who's there? Airstrike. Airstrike who? Airstrike you.
Wait, what?
For those in the audience keeping track, Brendan just soloed a late-game siege at 300% game difficulty, and if somehow enough pawns had survived this encounter to keep going, he would have been more than capable of plucking some of them out of position and stabbing them with his monosword before retreating. This seems like one of the game balances of all time. Don't worry, it's gonna get worse later. Speaking of overpowered, you might be wondering, why is Goose bothering to collect all those unstable power cells from the mechs? We have 12 of them now. Surely that's getting a little bit ridiculous, right? This is a fair question. Despite free power sounding good on paper, it's never going to be an issue for a late game colony unless you're doing something really weird. I have two answers to that question. The first is that Save Our Ship has to break game balance in a number of ways for it to function as a mod at all, and using its overpowered, hardy har har, generators outside of the context they're intended kind of ruins a lot of the fun of the game as a result, so I'm not going to do it. The second is to ask you all a question. Where have my advanced components been going? Like, no, seriously, think about it. Where have all of my advanced components been going? I've had Brendan, and now Bicep, who I just realized I needed to rename, so welcome to the colony, Purple Fire, cranking out advanced components non-stop for roughly 3.5 years, and all I have to show for it are a handful of random bionic limbs, and an unusually well-armed puddle jumper, which is honestly where most of them went. None of these account for the vast amount of advanced components that I should have accumulated by this point. That's because they all went to this. This is a pocket dimension. When activated, it will create a new map location that can only be accessed by entering or exiting this little structure you see here. Pocket dimensions, or specifically this structure, can be uninstalled, moved, packed onto caravans, and shipped across the world, and it won't affect the resulting dimension in the slightest. The only way of destroying it is to break the item or breach the structure from the inside. The drawback to this technology is the cost. Larger dimensions need exponentially larger amounts of advanced components to make, and you start very quickly suffering diminishing returns in the process, so you are better off keeping the dimensions as small as possible. Unfortunately for this mod, I play GregTech New Horizons Challenge Mode for the lols, and am conditioned to see diminishing returns as a personal affront to my playstyle. Which is why I've crammed 144 advanced components into this little box, and now have a pocket dimension big enough to hold an entire colony. Gee, I sure wonder where this is going. As it turns out, it's going to go in the next episode, because I started scripting all of the stuff that I need to show off about how incredibly cooked these things are, and it unironically took 10 minutes, so that's going to be a lecture for later. For now, thank you for your time, and I hope you enjoyed.